Good morning. Today we're going to talk about the mathematical features of a horizontal hyperbola. I would make sure that you have a notebook out and that you take excellent notes, and feel free to pause this video at any time. You're going to want to refer back to this video for future problems. So in a horizontal hyperbola, if I could give you a checklist of what you would need to know for a quiz or test, I would say you need to understand standard form, how to find the center, the vertices, the co-vertices, the focus points, and notice that these terms are very similar to what we would find on an ellipse. The transverse axis, the conjugate axis, the slope of asymptotes, and letters A, B, C. Okay, so I'm going to break it all down in a super easy way. The first thing we want to talk about is standard form for a horizontal hyperbola. And the way it's going to look is it's going to be the quantity x minus h squared divided by a squared minus the quantity y minus k squared over b squared equals 1. Now, a couple important points to note. In a horizontal hyperbola, the x will always be the first term, okay? And that is how I'm going to know it's a horizontal hyperbola. The other thing you're going to want to note is that the a squared isn't necessarily the greater number. It's just that in the horizontal hyperbola, the a squared is always going to come first and be under this positive term, okay? So in a horizontal hyperbola, we'll always see this format, okay? So a squared could be big or small. It just always comes first, okay? This is different from the ellipse, remember, where a squared was the bigger number. Okay, the other important feature of a hyperbola that distinguishes it slightly from the ellipse is this minus sign here, okay? That's a key feature of the hyperbola. If you go on Desmos and you were to graph this, you would notice that the minus sign makes this a hyperbola. Remember, with the ellipse, this was a plus, okay? So just a couple things to make sure we understand. Now, once we understand standard form, let's talk about how to find the center. And the center is going to be relatively straightforward. It's going to be just like all the other centers we've ever found. It's going to be the point HK. All right, so we're going to look at that from the equation here. Okay, now let's talk about the vertices. And before we can talk about the vertices, I'm going to draw just sort of a quick sketch of what this is going to look like. That way you can kind of place everything. So this is not necessarily to scale, but you can kind of get the idea. All right, so let's say we have this horizontal hyperbola. That means we have a sideways facing parabola on the left. We have a sideways facing parabola on the right. Okay, and this point is going to be my center. Okay, we know that's HK. And you may have guessed it, this point here is going to be a vertex. This point here is going to be a vertex. Okay, and I'll talk about in a second how I find that. And the focal points are very similar to a parabola. They're going to be inside the parabola somewhere. So this is going to be a focus point. Okay, and this is going to be another focus point. And what's interesting about the horizontal hyperbola, and this is something kind of weird, but there's almost like this imaginary rectangle. I'm going to try to draw this the best that I can, that sits in the middle. Okay, and this rectangle is important because this point here on this imaginary rectangle is going to be what we call a co-vertex. Okay, and this point here will be a co-vertex. And then the other interesting thing will be that in a hyperbola, you're going to have these straight lines that are going to be asymptotes. and I didn't draw this properly, but that's an asymptote. Here's another one. But imagine the hyperbola, the branches of the hyperbola approaching these asymptotes but never reaching them. So think about these imaginary asymptotes that are straight lines. I'm actually going to continue the rest of this explanation in the next video. So just hang tight, make sure you have good notes, and I will see you in the next video to explain the remaining points.